control people. The most comprehensive plan emerging from the Rio event was Agenda 21. Of course, 21 referring to 21st century. For some time, and I'll read this to you here. For some time, obtaining a copy of Agenda 21 proved nearly impossible until a guy, an environmental activist named Daniel Sitars, came up with one. And in his introduction, he wrote this: Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. It calls for specific changes in the activities of all people. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced, a major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. And it goes on to say, there are specific actions which are intended to be undertaken by multinational corporations and entrepreneurs, by financial institutions and individual investors, by high-tech companies and indigenous people, by workers and labor unions, by farmers and consumers, by students and schools, by governments and legislators, scientists, women, children, in short, by every person on Earth, unquote. So they're pretty serious about controlling your behavior. So in those few words, Mr. Sitars bared the entirety of what Agenda 21 proposes. When examined carefully, the process he so emphatically champions would abolish property rights and cancel the precious God-given freedoms protected for Americans by the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. Is there a community or a person who would escape the designs of this monumentally ambitious plan? Nope. It actually parallels the frightening claims of folks like Hitler and Stalin and Mao Zedong. William Jasper, the author that I mentioned a minute ago, wrote this in the New American Magazine last February, a year ago. The UN's Agenda 21 is definitely comprehensive and global, breathtakingly so. It proposes a global regime that will monitor, oversee, and strictly regulate our planet's oceans, lakes, streams, rivers, aquifers, seabeds, coastlands, wetlands, forests, jungles, grasslands, farmland, deserts, tundra, and mountains. It even has a whole section on regulating and protecting the atmosphere. It proposes plans for cities and towns, suburbs, villages, and your rural areas. It envisions a global scheme for healthcare, education, nutrition, agriculture, labor, production, and consumption. In short, everything. There's nothing on, in, over, or under the earth that doesn't fall within the purview of Agenda 21. So that's why it's so insidious. But they're quietly promoting it. How do the Agenda 21 partisans intend to bring all this about? As we've already noted, there's no intention to bring in blue-helmeted UN forces. Instead, local and regional environmental activists funded by agencies of the U.S. federal government, like the EPA, the HUD, and Forestry and Wildlife Service, to name a few, or by grants from the huge resources of the Rockefeller Foundation and several environmental groups, have descended on local governments throughout the nation. So they come in and consult with the local government councils that are formed. And they offer their consultation and their federal funding. Here's the carrot, here's the money. Go do likewise sustainable development. So offering assistance in creating local initiatives so that they rewrite their county comprehensive plan, for instance. I live in Rutherford County, Murfreesboro area, and so a few years ago, Rutherford County rewrote their comprehensive plan for development for 2025, looking into the future for 25 years down the road. And throughout it is the language of sustainable development. And that's going on in counties all over the country at the local level. Offering assistance in creating local initiatives designed to carry out the UN's designs, they never tell any local official whose plan they were actually following. The reality is that many promoters of these plans are unaware of either Agenda 21 or its United Nations origination. That's why, and we've seen this, you go to these town council meetings and start talking about, hey, this is Agenda 21, this is United Nations. They will give you that stare and wonder what the heck you're talking about, and where'd you come from, what planet are you from. They were unaware totally of that. And that's just, the UN has a history of working deceptively because they know that they cannot legislate what they want to happen because the people will rise up. So they have to sneak it in. How can you stop Agenda 21? Well, first identify where it's at. Numerous local governments have been lured into accepting help to save the planet from ICLEI, from the UN-related organization known as ICLEI, the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. Now, don't you have a problem with that title? Yes. I don't want an international agency telling local people what to do. We don't need that. Our founding fathers did not need that. They had no desire. It operates under the name ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. They don't like to use the word international anymore. When offered ICLEI's assistance, local officials at the city and town level are frequently delighted to accept it. They have already been led to believe unproven claims about looming environmental catastrophes, such as the claim that humans are causing global warming. So ICLEI and its non-governmental organization, NGO companion, the World Mayors Council on Climate Change. So did you know there's a World Mayors Council on Climate Change made up of a whole bunch of city mayors? And so their activities at the recent conference in Durban, South Africa is a good example of the UN reaching down to the local level. In a speech given where he was an advisor with the Clinton Council on Sustainable Development, Mr. Gary Lawrence said this: participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out conspiracy-fixated groups in our society. Such as the National Rifle Organization, citizen militias, and some members of Congress. And this is Mr. Lawrence writing. This segment of our society who fears a one-world government and a UN invasion of the United States through which our individual freedoms would be stripped away would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the so-called conspiracy by undertaking local Agenda 21. So, we call our processes something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. They're being obviously deceptive. Here's a website picture from the ICLEI.org. The ICLEI method of operation does not inform local officials that they are carrying out the plans of Agenda 21. And of course, none of them wear blue armbands or those blue helmets. Instead, they generously offer funding to start local programs whose totalitarian goals are never mentioned. Yet these programs will lead to several things: eliminating private ownership of property, barring access to woodlands and wetlands, they're already starting to do this, restricting civil liberties, forbidding large families, limiting the amount of disposable trash, placing a ceiling on energy consumption and water use, dictating amounts and types of farm production, and forcing participation in community projects, forcing them. In some U.S. communities, ICLEI's role has been carefully studied and then rejected. Early in last year, for instance, Maryland's Carroll County unanimously withdrew from the UN's ICLEI and then abolished their County Office of Sustainability. Well, as soon as one rejects ICLEI, we get another one that accepts ICLEI. Shelby County in Memphis area, last year, I think it was November or December, became a member of ICLEI, among others. I'll point out those here in a minute. So Maryland's Carroll County withdrew because citizens rose up and educated their city council. And the city commissioner there, Richard Rothschild, I don't think he was any relation to the big bankers, he explained he was very much against ICLEI. He said, ICLEI is an organization with extreme beliefs on global warming that promotes UN's big government socio-economic policies. He cited the related UN Millennium Papers that told activists to avoid resistance at the local level by labeling our process something else, like comprehensive planning and smart growth. So other communities have come off of that, and I'll point those out here in a minute. But how many so far? Right now, more than 600 cities and counties and towns in America are members of ICLEI. And in our region here, I cover 3 states for the society. Alabama has 2 cities, Huntsville and Birmingham, are members of ICLEI. In Georgia, the ones listed you see there, Atlanta was one of the first cities to join in 1996. And then in Tennessee, we have these 9 areas that are now members of ICLEI. And I believe Knoxville joined while Mr. Haslam was mayor. So he was along with that. So you can find out other cities and towns in your country and around the world by just going to ICLEI.org and click on members and global members. If the American people are to remain free of world government control, and if our nation's independence is to be preserved, ICLEI and the goals of Agenda 21 must be rejected. So the information in this booklet here should be shared with local government officials. Once made aware of the UN stealth operation, sound-thinking Americans from coast to coast will refuse to participate. They will instead retain control of their local communities and continue life in an America that's free from outside interference. Back in 1987, Norway's Prime Minister, a lady by the name of Brundtland, she won acceptance at the UN where she was asked to lead a commission to study environmental issues. And she defined sustainable development here. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Pretty broad definition here. And this is where the words sustainable development first appeared in 1987 in that report. She later on became the United Nations, the head of the World Health Organization, WHO. She is an admitted humanist and socialist and was appointed the vice president of the Socialist International. You may have heard of that organization. And that is nothing more than Karl Marx's Communist International. Well, in 1992, our illustrious President George H.W. Bush signed the Agenda 21 agreement in Rio de Janeiro as the representative of the United States. And in 1993, just a year later, when Clinton was then in office, he issued Executive Order 12582, establishing the President's Council on Sustainable Development. In 1996, the United Nations Environment Program published Global Biodiversity Assessment, a document that aimed at the right to own and use private property. In 1998, the Council on Sustainable Development, created by President Clinton, issued a book called Sustainable America, America's Environment, Economy, and Society in the 21st Century. Paralleling the content and goals of Agenda 21, this volume's editor was Mr. Daniel Satars, whom I quoted earlier. So the editor of the book called Sustainable America was Daniel Satars, and the foreword of that book is written by our favorite Tennessee son, Al Gore. He wrote the foreword to that book, Sustainable America. Yeah. On June 9th of last year, Obama signed Executive Order 13575, which established the White House Rural Council. How many have heard of that? Some of you have heard, okay. The White House Rural Council. Isn't that just warm your heart? The purpose of that is to facilitate the federal coordination and implementation of sustainable development at the local rural community level. And it targets the 16% of the American population that's rural. It further calls for strong, sustainable rural communities. Of course, by now you can see that the word sustainable is the operative word, and it's loaded with ominous implications. Speaking of which, and as noted previously, many of the groups formed to promote Agenda 21 use that term, sustainable development, because it sounds positive. Who wouldn't want a sustainable community and things that you can continue? But it's an appealing name. In 1993, President Clinton also signed the UN Convention on Biodiversity, another product of the Earth Summit from 1992. Immediately related to Agenda 21, this program sought to protect ecosystems through implementation of the Wildlands Project. Speaking of the Wildlands Project, some of you may have seen this map developed by a fellow that's been researching Agenda 21 problems for a while. His name is Michael Kaufman. And this map of the red areas are off limits to human presence at all. The yellow areas are like buffer zones for temporary travel. And then you can't see it because it's kind of a large map, but the black areas are where they want to move people from out of the rural areas into more congregated urban areas. This was presented to the U.S. Senate. The convention, UN Convention on Biodiversity, was presented to the U.S. Senate for ratification in '93. And it was rejected when key senators were shown this map depicting the plans to transform more than half the U.S. into uninhabited wilderness. And it's backed by the UN's International Union for Conservation of Nature. And the Wildlands Project aims to force people off 50% of the land and steer them into cities where they would no longer have access to automobiles and where their use of energy, water, etc. would be controlled. And then there's family planning. Will be in sync with the sustainability that they look for in population, such as that promoted by the United Nations Population Fund. This program encourages the use of sex education, contraception, and abortions to curb population growth. The idea of a sustainable population arrived at by drastic reductions of births is emphasized in the book Sustainable America, there it is, which states that the United States must have policies and programs that contribute to stabilizing global human population. The book goes on to call for stabilization of the U.S. population and a reduced rate of population growth in the United States and the world. To make sure that current and future generations are on board with this radical realignment of personal and corporate priorities, Sustainable America book proposes recommending the alteration of public school curriculum to promote smart growth and sustainable development. And I quote from that book, "We must also expand the number of curricula, materials, and training opportunities that teach the principles of sustainable development." And this one hit me pretty personal here recently. My son, my 22-year-old son, he graduated recently from Middle Tennessee State University with a major in construction management. And he told me last year he was thinking about getting a master's degree at MTSU in sustainability. They now offer a master's degree level on sustainable development at MTSU, and I'm sure other colleges around the country. So I quickly educated my son on this, and he's decided not to do that. So yes, it's in the colleges as well. And somebody emailed me recently an image from a book for children on Agenda 21 to teach how Agenda 21 is good to children. And the book is called Rescue Mission Planet Earth. That's what it is. Rescue Mission Planet Earth. It's a book for children that teaches sustainable development principles from the United Nations. You can find it on Amazon. So this would be the result of Agenda 21 when it comes to population control. I could cite many other ominous signs from the book Sustainable America. the whole idea of reducing our standard of living to achieve sustainability is summarized in this quote: "Stabilization of the population without changing the consumption and waste